With the Digimon card game closing out its 4th year, this year's Nationals will be one of the last times this will ever happen in the card game, at least for now. In the past, these high-level events felt at times predictable, because there was always one meta-defining deck that outclassed everything else. At the conclusion of Digimon Nationals 2021, Gabumon piloted by Chungman Chan would be the deck that would take first place. This was arguably also one of the best decks in the format because you had cards like Madoki-Betamon who could floodgate your opponent's boards on gaining memory. You also had access to not just one Hammerspark and one Ice Wall, but this would also be the only time we would see both of these options at 4 copies each. In 2022, Black War Greymon X piloted by Andre Pardoma would be another deck that dominated the format. And it wasn't simply because of Hades Force being the tamer hate needed against Crossheart decks, but this would be the last time Greymon X would also be unlimited to assist in Digivolution cost reductions and protection. And finally, at the conclusion of last year's Nationals, Anubismon piloted by Bryce Miller Booker would see substantial use in the top 16, being represented by at least 25% of the players. And the common element here, Anubismon was also unlimited at this instance and could toss out free bodies for even more bodies for maximum damage. Bottom line, my reasoning for framing this video with this type of introduction is to denote that Bandai always has the opportunity to restrict problematic cards well in advance of a major event if it's known. With restrictions to Ice Wall, would the 2021 Nationals have differing results? With the restriction of Greymon X, would you see considerably less Greymon X players, and inadvertently also reduce the number of players who are on Grandest Kuwagamon? And finally, with Anubismon restricted, would Anubismon ever have been playable from the get-go? It's interesting to me to a degree that immediately after all of these events, each of these winning decks saw a card that was at 4 copies go to 1. At the present, if you head over to Eggman's website Eggman Events page, link in the description by the way, you can find all forms of data for the current format, in particular charts that designate the top 16 information, and more. And while it's not a perfect one-to-one with Japan's meta, Scrambles will add another element for some of the purple decks, most notably Lord Nightmon X and Fenrir-Lugamon. Though I think there is also a degree of play that could be done with red Scrambles if you're playing Galaxy Mush. So with the foundation established for this video, today's discussion is mainly in regards to after Bandai Card Games Fest 2024 Nationals, what are some realistic possibilities for restrictions? For this video, most of what I speculate will pull from the Digimon Meta's website, link also in the description in regards to what topped. But remember, due to Japan's format being a best of 1, sometimes the deck isn't about consistency, but rather high rolling into a single win. Although not mentioned specifically, the first deck I do want to touch on ultimately comes in the form of Galaxy Mush. Galaxy Mush, also known as Galaxy, Galaxy Mirage, and more, is a deck that utilizes the bottom line engine of Galaxy cards from EX5, as well as the Tamer, Ko, and Sayo. Because the baseline typically goes with red, you also have easy access to cards like Shamanmon and Gotsumon for floodgating your opponent's board. But what's particularly obnoxious about this deck is that even though it is a hodgepodge of red and blue cards, the top end takes from many powerful archetypes and can at times be rage-inducing. For example, this deck can utilize the powerful top end of miragegaogamon from BT11. This deck was featured several times in Core TCG's Regional on the 9th of November, and you can find the entire stream for it on this channel. With so many cards that can search, or have mandatory effects that when promoting search or add cards to the hand, who doesn't like stealing back some memory? Other variations of the deck have ways to play out cards at the start of the opponent's turn, rendering many of the start of main effects useless. Another card that Galaxy players are running is hexeblaumon, and for the fact that you can trash Digivolution cards, this renders even cards like X-Antibody Protoform moot, because now they won't go back to security if the Digimon leaves the battlefield. In the face of other decks, you would have so many sources thanks to Galaxy effects that your opponent's Digimon with fewer sources can't suspend. Did I mention that this card can also bounce a Tamer to the bottom of the deck? And with Special Booster 2.0, Ryugumon has also entered the picture as well. Bottom line, I'm of the opinion that Galaxy Mush is a very complex deck that players can't just pick up and start playing. In some ways, it even supersedes purple decks in regards to complexity, in which if you misplay, that can very well end the game for you. But because this deck can utilize so many powerful top ends, and other cards like haunkunmon to keep the ball rolling and building wider, does this deck warrant a restriction of some form? I'm still of the opinion that miragegaogamon is a problem card, and because of this, the most extreme tactic that Bandai could potentially implement would be the restriction of BT11 miragegaogamon to ultimately put an end to decks that try and loop memory back to their turn. That being said, I also feel that this is a smidge aggressive for a specific deck archetype. Likewise, targeting hexeblaumon or haunkunmon destroys their respective archetype decks as well. And ultimately at this point, I feel like a long list of choice restrictions just needs to be expanded when utilizing these specific cards with Sayo and Ko, or Ko and Sayo. These tamers are just too generic for their effects. And while Galaxy is just one deck that I think will arguably one of the contenders for Nationals 2024, what are the other expectations do I have? Lord Nightmon X is probably going to be a meta contender for this particular format because of how efficient it can be. It also utilizes a lot of powerful purple cards and has multiple floodgates that can really dampen strategies. But ultimately, when you look at Lord Nightmon X, what is truly the problematic card? Frankly, while you could argue the scramble options are a tad too powerful, they're too new to fundamentally be on the chopping block. And what's to say that X Antibody Protoform gets the hit from 4 to 1? While it would severely dampen other decks that can use the Protoform, I think this would also shift most players back to a more aggressive approach with the OG X Antibody. And again, in my last video, I mentioned the possibility of an X Antibody strong option card in BT20. But overall, when you look at other decks in the format, Red Hybrid, Imperial Dramon, Fenrir-Lugamon, and Purple Hybrid, these are a lot of the decks that are represented at the top of events. And it does make me wonder whether some of these decks are likely going to get hit harder as well, post-Nationals. Take Red Hybrid and Fenrir-Lugamon for example. The common card here is Analog Youth, and with no reprint of this card in sight, it puts into question on whether Bandai isn't reprinting it because they're likely going to limit it, and then there will be an influx of available copies. When it comes to White Tamers, only 2 White Tamers ever really exceeded my expectations, and that was Analog Youth and Cool Boy. But in regards to Purple Hybrid, I can't really say at this point if there's something in the deck that bothers me. But if we loop back around to Imperial Dramon, there's so much in the deck that I think upsets a lot of players. BT12 Stingmon and XVmon are 2 cards that some players think deserve a hit. Davis and Ken from BT16 is another, but in my opinion, this would kill the deck hard. Though you could probably get away with Jade Memory Boost to compensate for that, and also search what you need and float the 2 memory for later. Is it as effective? No. But the bottom line is, people think that this card is unfair. But for me, the big faux pas of this deck falls in line with the option card, Return to the Primogenitor. I'm just not a fan of this card's design because it feels like HPD on steroids, and it's not only usable in Imperial Dramon decks but can be also utilized in Magnamon decks as well, considering this card is a free trait. Bottom line, this will be the last time we get a glimpse into the future for Nationals, because at Nationals 2025, all will be unified except for the contentious point of best of 3 versus best of 1. Generally, do you think that Bandai should preemptively restrict cards before these high-level events if certain cards are problematic? With the way history has been, I can't help but wonder what kind of results would there have been if Icewall was at 1, Greymon X was at 1, and even Anubismon was at 1. What would have been the topping deck? But because of this identical trend, it also indicates that a restriction is on the horizon just before EX8 drops. And what do you think will get hit? Let me know your thoughts and theories, and as always, I'll catch you on more Digimon content next week. This is DIGI-PANDA, logging out.